Riverwalkers.
Don't follow the color wheel. So they have, first of all, they have no capacity to dig whatsoever. Riverwalkers can't do anything with spades to get in the game, and they can't use workers to dig. And this is also depicted on the color wheel on their faction board. There's no spades in between the colors like other factions have. So for Riverwalkers, the way they expand, the way they build, is that they unlock colors throughout the game by gaining priests. This is depicted in their book ability. It's a bit hard to see, but basically Riverwalkers choose one color to start on, and they put their initial starting dwellings on that color, and they can build on that color throughout the rest of the game, but they can't build on other colors until they unlock them by removing the priest from that color. And the way they do that is by gaining a priest in the game. So whenever Riverwalkers gain a priest, they have the option of either removing a priest from a color, thus unlocking it. They do this by paying 1 coin if it's a color that's not the home terrain of another faction, or if it is the home terrain of another faction, it costs them 2 coins. And there's exceptions for this for ice factions and for volcano factions where they don't really have a home terrain, so their starting terrain still only costs 1 coin to unlock. But basically, that's how Riverwalkers build on different territory. They start with 6 of their 7 priests on different colors, so they only actually have 1 priest in their supply to start. But when you remove a priest from a color, so when you unlock a color, that priest goes into the supply. So Riverwalkers almost will always want early priests to unlock terrain, and then later in the game they start to take priests from their supply to use like they normally would, like another faction would in the cults, for example. A couple other notable things about Riverwalkers is, as you can see, they start with 1 shipping, and they're stuck to 1 shipping. So they cannot expand past 1, they cannot increase shipping past 1. And also really important, which is not depicted on their faction board, is that Riverwalkers must use shipping to build a new dwelling. So Riverwalkers cannot build directly through a landmass. They have to cross a water hex in some form in order to reach a new hex to build a dwelling. It's a bit weird though, because Riverwalkers are still connected if they're have 2 adjacent land hexes to each other, and that still works for towning, but they can't build through land. They must cross a water space or use a water space to get to another coastal hex to build. Other key points for Riverwalkers, their income is interesting. It's actually almost kind of similar to engineers in that they lack a worker income from their 3rd dwelling, and they lack a worker income from their 6th dwelling. And their 2nd temple also produces 5 power, so all very similar to engineers, but Riverwalkers do have a base income, like most other factions and unlike engineers. Riverwalker's stronghold has a standard cost, so 4 workers and 6 coins, and it gives them a one-time ability to place 2 bridges immediately. So it's really more of a late game stronghold. Riverwalkers always have 1 shipping, so they don't really need the bridges to expand. They're really just to help them form towns. And then lastly, but also really important for Riverwalkers, is they have a very low starting power situation. So they have 10 power in Bull 1 and 2 power in Bull 2. This is the lowest of any faction as far as I know. And the big thing for this is that it makes it difficult for Riverwalkers to take early power actions. They especially often want a priest power action to unlock a new terrain early in the game. And so without a power bonus and some leech from other factions, it's going to be very difficult for Riverwalkers to achieve. Riverwalkers are a faction with really clear strengths and weaknesses. One of the biggest strengths of Riverwalkers is their ability to expand rapidly. That really, the cost of a priest in 1 coin or a priest in 2 coins to unlock a color for the rest of the game is really an amazing deal. Like, I like to think of it as like you're spending a priest and a coin for a few spades. And so thinking about it that way, like it kind of becomes clear how efficient that is for Riverwalkers. So it's super easy for them to expand. And when you're playing Riverwalkers, you should be taking advantage of this. You should be unlocking colors early on. You should try to get priests like round 1 if you can. If not round 1, get priests in round 2 and unlock colors in round 2. And use these to build dwellings out quickly. Even with their income, their worker income gaps, it's still worth it for Riverwalkers to get out dwellings because they're so good at it. One of the struggles of Riverwalkers, or one of their weaknesses, is that they're limited to 1 shipping. And this can make connection really difficult for Riverwalkers. So when you're playing with them, it's really important to be aware of this, and you really do want to secure connection quickly. I think even in round 1, you should be trying to unlock colors that let you connect. But if not round 1, definitely by round 2, you want to try to be connected, or at least have a very clear path to connect that doesn't look disruptible. Another advantage or upside to Riverwalkers is that they actually can be quite an aggressive faction. This may not be the most obvious by looking at their faction abilities, but it becomes more clear once you're noticing that it only costs them one extra coin to unlock an opponent's territory to build on. This is such a minimal cost, like the one extra coin is really not that big of a deal. And so as Riverwalkers, you shouldn't be afraid to unlock other players' colors. You shouldn't be afraid to make the game messy, to fight to secure your territory and to cut other players off. And so I don't think you should be aggressive for the sake of being aggressive, but you definitely should be taking hexes that are important to you and also to other factions. So definitely don't be afraid to unlock opponents' colors and use them to be aggressive as Riverwalkers. One more weakness of Riverwalkers is scoring points. They really do have a scoring problem, even more so than like other standard economic factions. Like compared to Nomads, for example, Riverwalkers have an even harder time scoring because they have no ability to advance shipping or digging for points. And so Riverwalkers really need to find ways to score during the game. The most common ones are with Earth 1 and Water 1. They love scoring favors, and they can also take them earlier than most factions because of their really good early game economy with their expansion. But Riverwalkers also really like high scoring tracks, so lots of dwelling and trading post events and late town events, for example. They like the dwelling BP bonus in particular. They really want to win network or at least do very well on network. And then you usually want 3 towns as Riverwalkers. All these things are very important in their own right because Riverwalkers don't have backup options for scoring. Important thing for Riverwalkers in the opening is to get a priest. The easiest way to do this is just to start the priest bonus. So if it's in the game and if you have the option to take the priest bonus as Riverwalkers, you basically always should be taking it. If you don't get the priest bonus, then you really want to have your eye on this priest power action. Getting an early priest for Riverwalkers is just really important because it lets them use their ability, their expansion ability, which is the best, they're the strongest part of their faction. But it's also really important for securing key hexes and securing connection, which can be very kind of up in the air if left for Riverwalkers too long. The thing with the priest power action is that Riverwalkers only start with 2 power and Bull 2. And so in order to get this, they usually need to start on a power bonus. The best of these bonuses is worker power. Of course, the power helps you get a priest power action, but the worker also can be quite useful for Riverwalkers to get an extra dwelling down. But you also can take temporary shipping or the ship VP bonus. Temporary shipping is interesting because it may let Riverwalkers to access more territory which they can build on, but it's a bit risky because remember that you're stuck to one shipping permanently, and so you can't advance shipping to connect later. You have to kind of backtrack to connect with temp shipping. The standard opening for Riverwalker is a temple and dwellings, and so to do this, you get a priest in some form, and you unlock territory which you can build from your starting dwellings, and then you build a temple. And with a temple, you usually want one of Fire 1 or Earth 1. Fire 1 is a really good favor for Riverwalkers because it complements their income well. They have a really easy time getting dwellings out compared to most factions, and so even though they have these worker income gaps in their 3rd and 6th dwelling, they still do produce a lot of workers early, and so the coins from Fire 1 complement that really nicely. And then Earth 1 is good for Riverwalkers to open with because they have an easy time getting dwellings out, but also because they have a really good early game economy because of their ability. And so it doesn't really hurt them as much as it can hurt other factions to open with the Earth 1 favor. The thing to note with Riverwalkers when you're opening temple and dwellings is that you can try to work around this dwelling gap for the 3rd dwelling. It's not a big deal to end with temple and 3 dwellings on the board and have this gap uncovered, but it's just as good to end with temple and 2 dwellings. And you also may have options to go past this 3rd dwelling and end round 1 with temple and 4 dwellings, or even temple and 5 dwellings. For this, you need an extra worker or 2, and this is where worker power really shines and looks really nice. But also the workers from the big building tile can be quite helpful for this, especially if you want to go for that 5th dwelling. And then you need a priest, of course, and for the 5th dwelling, you need a coin or 2, and you also need the coin to unlock territory. But you can usually find that with a bit of leech. But I think as Riverwalkers in the opening, they have potential to have an explosive opening more so than most factions, and you should try to have your eye on that when playing Riverwalkers. A good backup if you get priest starved is going double temple. So it's a pretty strong opening for Riverwalkers because it produces a priest, and it also produces 5 power from the 2nd temple. And 5 power in Terra Mystica is just a really good income to have in the early stages. Power lets you get power actions. which are really efficient ways to build your economy. And even though Riverwalkers don't have any use for the spade power actions, they're still happy to have the power to get coins actions, workers actions, and priest actions later on. And I consider Double Temple more of a fallback. I think ideally you really do want to get that priest and get expansion going early. But if you do get priest blocked, like if the priest bonus is not in the game and another faction takes the priest power action, then you could take, let's say, a workers power action to open Double Temple, or you start on the big building tile. You use the 2 workers from that tile for Double Temple, and it can work pretty well as a fallback. You just need to make sure to get your expansion up and running after. And with Double Temple, I almost always find I take Fire 1 and Earth 1, but you can consider Earth 2 as another alternative, potentially. Riverwalkers can also open with a Dwelling Rush or with a partial Dwelling Rush with the Trading Post and Dwellings. For this, they just need a priest from the bonuses to unlock new territory. And this can actually be a pretty strong opening, but it is a bit dangerous not having a temple on the board going into round 2. The priest production is really valuable for Riverwalkers to unlock more territory, to secure town space and expansion and connection. And so I think it's definitely a riskier play and a play that requires a little more skill, but it is something you can consider in select situations.
All right, let's consider some territorial considerations here. As Barnawal mentioned, competing on network is really important for Riverwalkers. It tends to be. And so one of the things we're going to think about in our territorial considerations and our initial placements is, are we confident that we can connect these 2 placements? In almost all cases, we're going to want to be able to do that. And so that's one thing we're thinking about. And as such, you should be willing to keep your 2 starting placements closer to each other as Riverwalkers, maybe more so than for other factions because of that limitation of not being able to increase ship. And also their ability to pretty flexibly expand no matter what. I mean, they already start on 1 ship as well, and they spread out so quickly with the efficiency of the unlocking colors that making sure you connect in the first place is kind of more important than for a typical faction. Now, I also want to think about how to look at a map as Riverwalkers, because the map, the way we experience it, is a little bit different. First of all, we note that there's some hexes that we can't even access, right? So all these hexes, for example, in the east, we as Riverwalkers can't get to any of that. And if you look around the map, you'll start to see, okay, there is actually most hexes are touching water in some fashion, but any hex that is not touching any water at all is not accessible to Riverwalkers. And so when you kind of put on your Riverwalkers goggles, base map actually looks a little bit different. These are actually the hexes that are available to us. The ones that are whited out here, it is not possible for Riverwalkers to be on those hexes. So now, okay, so the map is a little bit smaller for us. So even though we can expand quickly, we have fewer hexes total. But also we should start thinking about what are our key hexes and what are the kinds of colors that are nice for us as Riverwalkers. So one thing that I want to do is I want us to start thinking about, you can think about this as like a social network and a question of whether with 1 ship, each hex can reach how many other hexes. Okay, so you can think about it as like these are network ties between each hex and other hexes. And we can start to weight the value of each hex by how many other hexes one can build on from that hex. So let's take a look at that. So here we can see for each hex, it's labeled with how many other hexes are reachable from it with 1 ship. So for example, looking at this C3 hex green in the middle, the reason it says 9 is that starting with D4 and working our way around, we could from there reach 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Yeah, I can count. So that's why that's labeled with 9. So so we could think about the value of each of these hexes according to how much it opens the map up for Riverwalkers on 1 ship. Again, they can't go to higher ship levels, so this way of thinking is really helpful. And we can start to account for things, right? So first of all, we've got some of the hexes disappearing from the map. So now different colors have different total number of hexes. So for example, green has 10 hexes here left, whereas black and brown only have 6 hexes left. Further, you can do some interesting things like looking at what's the total amount of reach for each color, right? Like reach being that weight that I've put on each of the hexes. So on the high end, green has a total reach of 54. That's how many, total touches it can do across all its hexes. Gray is actually second with a total reach of 46. And you can see like 3 kind of wild gray hexes around the board that have massive reach. And then on the low end, brown has only a total reach of 24. So brown tends to be a pretty weak color for Riverwalkers. Another way of thinking about this is just looking at how many hexes have 6 plus reach. So I've highlighted all the ones that can reach 6 or more other hexes. One thing you'll see is that 4 of those 13 are green, 3 are gray, and none of them are brown. So again, just to give you a sense of the type of value you should be thinking on certain parts of the board. And so, there's a couple things that also pop for us. For example, the isthmus here, the blue-black isthmus is really nice because it can get you from north to south. The other thing that pops for us is that although some of these gray hexes aren't great for starting on, they're extremely valuable for spreading out across the board. So gray is a common color that you'll unlock early in the game. As you can see, based on what we said so far, in general, green is a nice color for Riverwalkers. They have pretty good leech spots with it. Those hexes have good reach. So green is a nice one for Riverwalkers to be starting on. So let's go through this thought exercise of sort of what it's like to start on a given color for Riverwalkers. So I've been mentioning green a lot. Let's think about that for a second. Now, one thing that we said is we like hexes that have a lot of reach and have a lot of hexes left even after our whiteout. Green is really high on those. We have one thing to be concerned about, which is that something like F4 and C4 are maybe hard to connect. So if you're going to want to start north and south as green, you want to be looking hard at something like grabbing an E8 fairly early on to make sure that you're able to connect the north to south. It's pretty easy to have those disconnected, but sometimes E8 is quite safe, and so this could be nice. Another thing to consider is, remember, we said it's okay to start hexes near each other. So you could also punt on the south for green and go E9 and C3 and just play a north game. That can work really well. And so one color that also pops for us when you look at starting on green is something like unlocking red. All of a sudden, we've got so many reds next to greens that are really attractive, where you can imagine those two being synergistic. Alternatively, you can imagine starting on red and unlocking green first. I want us also to consider the idea of something like starting on yellow. Imagine starting on yellow here. And some of our options. So for example, if we're on F3, you can see that unlocking something like blue and getting into this area is really nice, right? Likewise, if we're on E8 or B4, we can build D5 and be building out that way. So those are opportunities to spread pretty quickly. I want to use this also to highlight something like if we're as yellow starting on F3 and E8, one thing we could do is we could unlock green and build F4 and thereby secure connection around 1. Because although those are technically we wouldn't be able to build on F4 from F3, but we can reach it from E8. But now that we have these hexes adjacent to each other, we are connected. So that's an example of trying to use building from sort of either side to find connection. One more example here would be thinking about black. I've been saying how brown is not a great color for Riverwalkers. And likewise, black is not great in the sense of not having that many hexes, and their average hex reach is kind of low. However, this is where Riverwalkers, like, they can build so much within one portion of the board that if they want to play all north, for example, all of a sudden black becomes a pretty nice color, right? You can start on E5. It's a great starting hex for them. It tends to get leech, but it also has good reach. And you can see how, by unlocking gray, they're able to immediately blow up their reach all over the board. C2 gets to, B3, C1. And so all of a sudden, like, things have really opened up for us. So, black in some sense is not a great color for them, but it depends on what part of the board you want to play on. And I think it's very reasonable as Riverwalkers to say, okay, I'm going to play on the top half of the board, and that's going to dictate what colors I'm going to be using. So just wanted to give you a sense of what that can look like or feel like from the perspective of a Riverwalkers player. Another big part of our territorial considerations as Riverwalkers will be trying to plan ahead for towns. So they can have a bit of an issue because they're sort of jumping across water, spreading out, that sometimes their building isn't very linear. Again, they also can't go inland, so that means their building, it tends to be across water. And so it can be a little bit hard to find towns. So part of your expansion plans should be figuring out, okay, we also really we tend to build a lot as Riverwalkers, and we have a hard time scoring, as aforementioned. So we want to make sure we're finding 3 towns, and really we need to make sure at least one of them ideally does not need a bridge, because they tend to need a lot of bridges for their towns. So if we can plan to, along some coast, like imagine, if we are at C4, right? If we, during the course of the game, unlock black and blue, here we are able to plan one, town that doesn't need a bridge. And then the other 2 towns, of course, it's better if they don't need bridges, but a very, very common thing to plan for is the stronghold in something like a round 6 that gives you 2 free bridges. And so that then might help complete a couple, final towns, like maybe we're, E4 we've built in the west, and then we're on H2, and then the stronghold gives us a bridge to turn that into a town in round 6. This is also, this should all be part of our planning as we think about development as Riverwalkers is, okay, how am I building out? Because you can spread yourself a little too thin as Riverwalkers, and the town points are so important that we want to make sure we are getting ourselves set and ready for that. Riverwalkers are a faction that's really easy to crash and burn with, so they have a very low floor, and new players can really blow up their games with them. However, if they're securing connection, then they kind of lock in that network competition, and they're pretty robust in terms of their ability to get their production going, because they can spread so quickly that they tend to be pretty reliable, medium strength faction. I think we would put them sort of on the low end of medium. Of course, some tracks fit them really well, which can push them up higher. But the fact that they also have a hard time competing on cults puts it towards the low end of medium, we'd say. So let's think about what kind of things Riverwalkers like and dislike in a setup. So first of all, they love seeing the pre-scroll in the game. They'd love to get it round 1. It tends to be better for them in future rounds than it is for other factions. Most other factions don't really care for pre-scroll once you get to round 3, 4 onwards, whereas it's still good for Riverwalkers. And also, so they want a lot of priests for unlocking colors. Interestingly, also because their second temple does not produce a priest, it produces 5 power instead, which is good, but that also means that extra priest you can get from a scroll once in a while actually really helps, maybe lets them put one to cult here and there as well. Preschool is great for them. The big no-no, I mean, it's not actually a deal breaker. I think it annoys me more than it annoys Barnawal, but when dig scrolls in the game, it drives me nuts, since Riverwalkers can't access it and everyone else loves it. In general, Riverwalkers tend to be good at generating workers. They get their dwellings out really fast, and they also are spending a little extra coinage on unlocking colors. And so for that reason, they really like to see the coin scrolls. So 6 coins, 4 coins. They really like to see those in the game. They tend to just be a little bit coin strapped. They also have a hard time scoring, but the 2 key scoring scrolls for them are dwelling scroll and trading post scroll. So those in particular, especially dwelling scroll, they can just get their dwellings out so fast, typically faster than other factions, and then sit on that scroll. The other 2 scoring scrolls are okay for them. Sometimes they'll have their SA out, mid game, but they almost never have their stronghold out till something like round 6. They can't increase shipping. So you kind of think ship scoring is bad for them. However, they do start with 1, and so you can hop on that for 3 points here and there. It's not quite deal breaker. But in general, this is how I'd sort of think about what I'm looking for. Is really would love to see priest, coins, dwelling, trading post scroll, and would love to avoid seeing the spade. Regarding again the types of tracks. Because they are so good at flowing out their dwellings quickly, they'd love to see a dwelling scoring round in one of the first 3 rounds, and I think ideal is round 2. Round 2, they can, go do a temple, maybe a little bit of dwelling, unlock us at, their third color, have 3 colors open by round 2 fairly easily, and then be building like all their dwellings out there. That's really nice. The other thing to look for with them is you definitely don't want to see towns in like rounds 3, maybe even 4. Is not great. It's better for other factions. They can really do well with stronghold round 6 and or towns round 6, because that stronghold gives you 2 bridges, and those bridges can then complete towns for yourself. So that can be a nice way to build out and then pop towns in a given round with the stronghold. You don't want to see spades on cult rewards. In general, you want the cult rewards to look a little bit ugly, since you tend to not play the cults very well for rewards. So the uglier cult rewards look, the better, and with some exceptions. I would say regarding other factions that they'd like to see in the game, one high-level observation to make is any faction that's going to live inland, like they primarily are digging factions that dig inland, are good news for Riverwalkers. So, for example, like thinking about halflings and or cultists on F5 in the east, the fact that their development often involves digging G5 down to H7, that's out of your way. You're not you don't care about brown anyway, in general on this map for the most part, and they're digging inland. So if halflings are, or even double east, imagine double east brown, like beautiful, totally out of your way. But you could also imagine like the ice factions tend to be digging factions, or something like swarmlings on G6. Swarmlings are often out of your way, right? They're just going to develop inland, or even D2 swarmlings are just going to like hang out of your way off to the side, or maybe in the southwest. Like that's beautiful. So you like that kind of situation where they're going to develop inland. Another one would be imagine darklings on C1 and something like G5. And where their plan is to just be split, right? Where they're just going to dig to black and not connect. Wonderful. That's just out of your way. So that's the kind of thing you want to see among opponents, because you don't risk them getting in your way because you need to connect. Also, factions like, there's of course exceptions to this. It depends on what color you're starting on, but factions like dwarves and fakirs, where a lot of their focus is on sort of tunneling or flying to a specific their own sort of native hex color. As long as they're not taking like the key hexes you need to connect, they can kind of stay out of your way often. And in fact, I'll throw giants in with that too. They tend to be really scared of Riverwalkers because they're petrified that you're going to unlock their color and basically cut your ability to expand. So I think that's how. And then on the flip side of this is any color or faction that's going to live a lot in coastal areas and be hitting your key hexes, your reach hexes that we were talking about earlier, are going to be a concern. And so like we'd be really worried about things like the green factions on this map. We talked about how critical certain parts of the board can be for us. And how valuable green is as a color to unlock. And another one would be mermaids. Mermaids would also make me nervous. So the green factions and mermaids expand quickly. They also are very interested in our key green hexes quickly. And so that would be something to keep an eye on. It's also possible that dwarves or engineers could be, beating us to like something like a C2 hex that we really want. And so there might be a game where gray taking C2 from us could be scary. One that you could think about too is like alchemists. They also fit the bill of often going shipping quickly and expanding quickly on coastal areas. I think it's not quite as bad as some of the other ones, but that's another one to keep your eye on. So I think at a high level, that's how we think about likes and dislikes here. Okay, let's zag a little bit as Riverwalkers here. So one thing you should put on your bucket list is just to go for a super explosive opening. So the one Barnawal is always angling for is Temple 5 dwellings. So Trading Post Temple, 4 new dwellings built, round 1. If you can finish round 1 with that is monstrous. So you can do that depending on the colors you're starting on. You can do that with only one color unlock. So for example, green and red on base map. And then you need to find 2 workers and a couple of coins. And you can find your way to that. With big openings like that, you could also, we haven't seen it done yet, but we think it's doable to build everything as Riverwalkers. If you go really hard on building things out, because they have access to hexes so easily, they should be able to build all 17 structures. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of things that are typically bad that you could try to spice it up, I'm like a sneaky supporter of opening just Temple 1 new dwelling with no unlocks round 1, because the dwelling after that does not produce a worker. And so I think there are ways where, and this is the one that's probably most controversial, is you could try surprising everyone by actually putting a priest to cult round 1. So you could not unlock, like let's imagine you're on a color that can reach one of its native hexes across the water. So imagine it's like red or green on base map. So you can open Temple 1 new dwelling without needing any resources for that, because you can reach that hex already. And then you could be putting a priest to cult to get some really nice cult reward. Imagine 2 workers or something like that back. Usually, one of the big advantages of Riverwalkers is being able to unlock and spread out quickly. But why don't you give a zag a try and see if you can have a Temple 2 dwellings total, and then a priest to cult round 1, and go from there. I think it's doable. Maybe not, definitely not what you should do as your go-to, but just to mix it up, give it a go. All right, have fun.